Hey guys, just wanted to let you all know that we've got new shirts on the merch store. We have a Zenithar shirt which just looks amazing and I'm really excited for you guys to try. Also, by popular demand, we have turned the Orcus zip-up jacket into a shirt. Definitely my favorite piece of art so far that we have done. Now that it is getting cold over here, I have started using the jacket all the time. It's amazing. Check out the store at mrrex.com. Now today we continue on our quest to attempt to make sense out of the impossibly long list of undead that exist in Dungeons & Dragons. From zombies to skeletons to ghouls and ghast to shadows and specters and wraiths and ghosts. It is a very confusing thing, the undead, but today we're going to talk about your favorite kind of undead, even if you might not necessarily know it based on their name. When you think of zombies in popular culture, you're probably thinking of the ghouls. Conversely, in many fantasy tropes, when you think about intelligent undead that possess their own culture and civilization, you're also typically thinking of ghouls. The thing is, ghouls are severely underused in Dungeons & Dragons, and we never get to see the full extent of what they're capable of in terms of storytelling. But before we go full blast on these creatures though, we should talk about our sponsor today. This video is brought to you by the Questonomicon, a book designed and written by our fellow content creators XP to level 3. Experience what can only be described as a shit ton of quest, with the book holding over 30 different adventures for you to partake in. Track down treasure on the high seas, ride through the Wild West to catch a train, fight dragons in urban areas. The book is designed to have a large variety of encounters and missions set in a multitude of different environments. Furthermore, the adventures presented here in the book are tailored so that you can choose which villains your players will have to fight, and depending on which villains you choose, the adventure changes. Does your posse of Wild West characters face the infamous outlaw and his goblin henchmen, or perhaps demons summoned by an insane mage? The book has just been put on Kickstarter last week, and its success depends on you. Check out the link on the description and go give it a look. There are tons of different pledge rewards that you can get by supporting the Kickstarter, from getting sick looking miniatures, which by the way really do look awesomely sick, to this also really cool DM screen. Apparently the magnetic initiative trackers are insanely cool. They're all the rage nowadays. Questonomicon on Kickstarter. Now back to the video. First, before we delve deep, let's go ahead and see what the 5th edition Monster Manual tells us about these creatures. It says that ghouls roam the night in packs, driven by an insatiable hunger for humanoid flesh. Like maggots or carrion beetles, ghouls thrive in places rank with decay and death. A ghoul haunts a place where it can gorge on dead flesh and decomposing organs, and when it cannot feed on the dead, it pursues living creatures and attempts to make corpses of them. And though they gain no nourishment from the corpses that they devour, ghouls are driven by an unending hunger that compels them to consume. A ghoul's undead flesh never rots, and this monster can persist in a crypt or tomb for untold ages without feeding. See, that last part about ghouls being able to persist forever without eating is very interesting, because that is, well, I guess it was not always the case. It thematically changes them a lot, as you can imagine, but we'll talk about that in a bit. It does continue on by saying that a ghoul traces their origins to the abyss. Dorsane, the first of their kind, was an elf worshipper of Orcus. Turning against his own people, he feasted on humanoid flesh to honor the demon prince of undeath. As a reward for his service, Orcus transformed Dorsane into the first ghoul. Now, Dorsane served Orcus faithfully in the abyss, creating ghouls for the demon lord's other servants until an incursion of Jinogu, the demonic gnoll lord, robbed Dorsane of his abyssal domain. When Orcus would not intervene on his behalf, Dorsane turned to the elf gods for salvation, and they took pity on him and helped him escape certain destruction. Since then, elves have been immune to the ghoul's paralytic touch. See, the lore actually states that whatever the elvish gods did to help Dorsane, they didn't actually prevent Jinogu from actually ruling and controlling Dorsane. For a while there in the story, Jinogu ruled the kingdom of ghouls and the white city of Dorsane until Jinogu got distracted and basically just lost interest or got driven back centuries later. In any case, we do have a special kind of ghoul in here called the Ghast. It says that Orcus sometimes infuses a ghoul with a stronger dose of abyssal energy, making a Ghast. Whereas ghouls are little more than savage beasts, a Ghast is cunning and can inspire a pack of ghouls to follow its commands. Now here are the stat sheets for the two creatures, one clearly just being the exact same as the other, but slightly stronger. Now the first thing that I need you to pay close attention to is the high level of intelligence. Unlike zombies who are, well, literally brain dead, ghouls are fairly intelligent for being undead, and Ghast are, well, quite as intelligent as any human. The claws of a ghoul can infect you with paralyzation unless you're an elf, which of course we now know why thanks to the little blurb up here. Though it is also important to note that the claw attack from the Ghast does affect the elves, and many people miss that. Now lastly, the Ghast carries with it a stench that poisons those around it, but that's honestly basically it. These are very basic creatures conceptually, and you wouldn't know it by just looking at them, but these creatures are incredibly important, and having them in your world would thematically change what your world could turn into. See, we have a lot to get into, so without further ado, let's talk about what the 5th edition Monster Manual did not tell you about the ghouls. I think by far the most important thing completely left out of the Monster Manual is that ghouls create ghouls. Getting attacked by ghouls, of course, have a chance at paralyzing you, but it also can afflict you with a disease called ghoul fever, which effectively weakens you over time. Quote, an afflicted humanoid who dies of ghoul fever rises as a ghoul at the next midnight. A humanoid who becomes a ghoul in this way retains none of the abilities it possessed in life. It is not under the control of any other ghouls, but it hungers for the flesh of the living and behaves like a normal ghoul in all respects. End quote. This is unbelievably crucial, and not talking about this effectively changes in its entirety what a ghoul can do and the real dangers that they carry with them. And you cannot just let ghouls be, and if your kingdom becomes aware that there are ghouls about, it must be dealt immediately, because otherwise it can quickly turn into an epidemic. This is why I said in the beginning that when you think of zombies in popular culture, you're probably thinking of the ghoul in D&D, because when a ghoul bites you, you will eventually turn into one yourself. The transformation into a ghoul is said to be particularly traumatic, so much so that it destroys your personality and mind, shattering it into oblivion. And when you come out of the other side as a ghoul, you would only remember fragments of your previous life, but more than anything, you will simply be a starved-out, flesh-seeking monster. Quote, the process which transforms a man's soul, mind, and body into a ghoul leaves little left of what was once the man. Its face takes on a canine aspect, developing an extended muscle full of sharp, discolored teeth. Even so, those who knew the victim may still see the man within the monster. Hands and feet become claw-like, while rank, oozing sores erupt on the body, scabbing over scale-like hardness. In the Ghast, these scaly sores exude an odious, nauseating carrion stench so powerful that it causes retching and nausea in those nearby. And likewise, the ghoul's mind is warped out of shape. A cunning, predatory semi-sentience overrides the victim's personality, essentially replacing what is lost by the horror of transformation. Remnants of the creature's mind remain intact, but the ghoul, or even the Ghast, rarely realizes, nor accepts, that it is dead. The last vestiges of the mind cannot accept that it thrives upon human carrion. The subsequent transformation to Ghast reawakens the creature's intelligence, as some might actually be personable, more prone to conversation than conflict, though they are still undeniably evil and more than a little insane, so long as one avoids discussing the ghoulishness or insisting that they have died. End quote. This is where things get even more interesting. Ghast actually get to retain the full personality and intelligence that they had in life, allowing them to continue, well, being themselves. There are still some limitations that have to be observed for this particular type of undead. For example, a person that gets transformed into a Ghast cannot retain much of their skills and abilities from their previous life. The only ones that get to do that would be the true ghouls, also known as the shadow ghouls or the greater ghouls. Now, these guys function basically like living people, except that they're, well, technically undead. But these guys have cultures and cities, religions, they literally, for all intents and purposes, are just another race. Now, that brings me to that other point that I made at the beginning of the video, that when you think of a fantasy trope of the, intelligent undead that has its own culture and cities, you are actually thinking of the ghoul. If you wanted to create something like, I don't know, Dark Souls in your campaign, then the undead would be these type of ghouls. I hope that now you see why it is crazy that the 5th edition Monster Manual wouldn't mention just any of this, considering just how archetypal and important ghouls are to the general state of fantasy. In the Underdark of Greyhawk, there is an entire empire of true ghouls, where the king is an avatar of Dorazane, that guy that they mentioned on the Monster Manual, that very same one. In this kingdom of ghouls, the ghouls have houses, they have art, advanced engineering, hopes, dreams, fears. I mean, the idea for the ghouls in Fallout was probably taken from these type of ghouls because they function very similarly. Now, these types of undead are interesting because they don't really have anything necessarily to do with necromancy. See, the type of undead that you create by animating the dead with arcane magic is called a zombie. And what you're really doing there is animating the bones of that undead. Now, ghouls are very interesting. You can still create them with powerful magic, of course, but generally speaking, they happen naturally. See, zombies are manipulated. Something or someone is moving those bones. Even if the magic is automated, something is technically pulling the strings. Ghouls, on the other hand, are fully sentient creatures that exist on their own merit. Technically, a zombie or a skeleton should just collapse under an anti-magic zone, whereas ghouls would not. A ghoul is created naturally when a living person embraces evil in their lives by taking advantage of others or abusing them or generally being extremely greedy. Most often than not, though, the main triggers tend to be when a person embraces cannibalism in life or is gluttonous to an obscene amount. When these people die, their life is ended, but their evil persists. If these people die without a priest blessing them or their grave is not sanctified, then that's when they become cursed to one life as a ghoul. If the person was powerful in life, then there is a higher chance that they will wake up as a ghast instead of a ghoul. This is actually the reason why foul towns or cities that reject decency and embrace evil behaviors tend to be more prone to undead. Now, even though ghouls can be created naturally in this way, it should be pretty obvious to anybody that most ghouls actually tend to come from other ghouls. Because of course, ghouls create more ghouls. Oh, I guess I should also mention that even though it is fairly obvious as well, a ghoul only turns other people into ghouls when those people get infected but survive. Generally speaking, a ghoul will just try and eat you, and of course you cannot be raised as a ghoul if you're devoured or killed or in the tummy of another ghoul. A person that is dead cannot be turned into a ghoul. You have to slowly transform and then let the disease actually kill you. You should also know that normal ghouls actually have no desire to transform people. They really just want to eat anything that looks humanoid, but true ghouls will definitely go out of their way to purposefully infect people in order to, of course, reproduce and swell their ranks. Now, to turn a ghoul into a ghast, you basically just need power. I mean, it's that simple. If you blast a ghoul with enough abyssal energy or negative energy, you would turn it into a ghast, further enhancing its abilities and opening up its intelligence and memories of its previous life. Realistically, if you cast the spell Negative Energy Flood from Zenithar, eventually over time you could actually turn a ghoul into a ghast. That's effectively how it works. Now, this process can also happen quite naturally for any ghoul that makes its way into the abyss. They automatically turn into ghast, basically. Now, getting a true ghoul to form is a lot more complex because it requires the help of the gods of death. The lore states that only the ghoul disease that comes from a true ghoul, who is a priest, can transform you into a true ghoul. So kinda weird, but basically, you cannot just turn into a true ghoul normally. You would need the assistance of a god of death, particularly demigods like Dorasane, the king of ghouls, or an entity like Orcus. Those entities would bless a particular true ghoul with clerical power. Then that ghoul would have to infect you. Further, the infection could not be allowed to progress naturally without the accompanying rituals. The rituals themselves are secret, but it is known that if those rituals are interrupted or not followed to the letter, then you will turn into a normal ghoul or ghast instead. For all these reasons, civilizations of true ghouls that exist are extremely religious to their dead gods because without them, their culture and civilization could not truly reproduce and prosper. It should also be noted that because of the natural protections that elves have against ghoul attacks, it is said that the transformation into a ghoul is much more painful to an elf. Any warm-blooded creature can be turned into a ghoul, but the part of the transformation where you are suffering and then dying of the ghoul fever is most often than not slept off. The disease weakens you in such a way that you basically just lay feebled until you sort of pass out and then presumably die in your sleep. An elf cannot sleep, and hence they suffer the excruciating pain of the death. which also happens slower because of their natural resistance, so they're pretty screwed. Further, again, because of this resistance, elves rarely ever are transformed into full-blown true ghouls. Dwarves, on the other hand, are said to transform rather easy for whatever reason, but that's why ghoul kingdoms that exist in the Underdark would tend to attack Duergar kingdoms more often than drow whenever they need to expand. Now, the Monster Manual in 5th edition claims that ghouls are effectively immortal because they don't actually need the sustenance from the food that they eat. However, this is only technically true for ghasts, but only for ghasts that specifically exist in the Abyss. According to the Undead book for the Forgotten Realms, quote, "Ghouls and ghast are not immortal. Because they are physical beings, they are subject to eventual decay. Most ghouls do not exist for more than 200 years. Even so, uncommon specimens have been found over 1,000 years old. The evil enhancement of the ghast allows them to exist for 500 years or more, though ghast who remain in the Abyss are nearly immortal," end quote. Unless you're talking about a ghast in the Abyss, you can indeed starve out a ghoul. It takes 7 days for ghouls to feel the negative effects of starvation, and after that, the creature will start losing 1 hit point per week without food. This is why it makes sense why someone would think that ghouls do not need food to eat, since it would take several months for a ghoul to actually die of starvation. But once a ghoul loses all of his hit points in this way, it would simply cease to exist and its soul will pass onto torment in the Abyss. Quote, "Ghouls and ghast exist only to eat. All else is secondary to a hungry ghoul or ghast. Ghouls and ghast must have human flesh to survive. They attack the living only when corpses are not to be had or in self-defense. They find animal flesh unpalatable. The flesh they eat maintains their physical bodies and their energy connection with the negative energy plane," end quote. This food requirement is a bit different for true ghouls, however, who are more perfectly aligned with the negative energies from the outer planes. Quote, "The ghoul's diet is a subject of considerable interest. Few undead need to eat in the usual sense, digesting and excreting. A ghoul's feeding is more spiritual than physical. While it must eat just as vampires do, a ghoul is nourished by the link to the flesh of sentient creatures, not by blood. If ghouls do not eat, they cannot heal their wounds. In addition, prolonged lack of sentient flesh breaks the strength of the ghoul's undead state, eventually returning the ghoul to a purely animal cunning. For ghouls to retain their intelligence over time, they must feast on the brains of sentient creatures. Ghouls have overwhelming effects on surrounding communities of creatures. They eat until all major sentient and animal species are exterminated or driven away, and they transform humans, Darrow, halflings, and half-elves into ghouls, increasing the hunger of the ghoul community. When there are too many of the undead and not enough living things for them to feed on, the ghouls enter a frenzy of madness, killing and slaying one another until their numbers are reduced to a level their environment can sustain," end quote. It should also be mentioned that the connection between a true ghoul and the negative energy planes are so strong that when a true ghoul dies, its soul stays and becomes a specter while still retaining its memories and intelligence. Also, unlike some other kinds of undead, you cannot resurrect or reincarnate a person that has been turned into a ghoul. See, for that to have happened in the first place, the person would have had to have died without being blessed or have its burial site consecrated by a priest, so its soul is already forfeit, basically. Oh, by the way, I feel like you would get a kick out of this. To actually repel a ghast, you need cold iron as a material component for your protection from evil and good spell. A holy water or silver will not do the trick. The reason that ghast has things like resistances to being turned is for that exact same reason. A cold iron is just so rare that people don't use it, but that's what you need. There's also a water version of the ghoul called the Lacedon. It functionally is the exact same thing as the ghoul, except that they are typically found on ghost ships and shipwrecks, and of course, they have swimming speeds. They appeared on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition, but then got uked out of 4th and 5th. Let's pay homage to our poor water boys with a like on this video. That they would like that a lot. Thank you guys for watching the video. Make sure to go over to MrRhexx.com and check out our cool shirts. Please consider buying that Orcus jacket, man. I promise you that you're gonna love it. It looks and feels amazing. A true banger, and it is getting cold, so you will appreciate it 100%. So as many of you know, I have been working on some PDFs for a while now that I have felt particularly inspired to do. I'm working hard on something of a redesign of the Dungeons & Dragons armor system in order to fix a lot of the issues that we have regarding most of the mundane armors feeling useless and uninteresting, as well as giving players a reason to want to spend money on their armor. Now for this project and some others that I have in the works, I'm in need of professional artists. If you're an artist seeking to do professional work in the Dungeons & Dragons sphere, then please send me an email at rhexxart@gmail.com. The link is in the description. If you want to apply, draw me a Dungeons & Dragons character in a full set of plate armor and send it over to me on the email, alongside whatever link that you might have where you keep your other art so that I can see it as well. Also make sure to put it in the email how much you charge for your work. It's very important. You can take your time with the drawing. There's no hurry. I'll be basing my decision mostly on that plate armor drawing, so if you need to take your time to make sure that it is good, you should do that for sure. The drawing should look like something that you would see in a first-party Dungeons & Dragons book, so the quality must be good, of course, but also the art style must be like what you would see from a Dungeons & Dragons adventure and such. So like no anime or whatever, right, obviously. If you're a designer, I'm also looking for someone who knows how to use programs like InDesign or similar stuff in order to create Dungeons & Dragons PDFs, like the ones that you see on the DM's Guild. So feel free to send me also an email at rhexxart@gmail.com with a link to a Dungeons & Dragons PDF that you have put together in the past. If you're a writer that have created cool Dungeons & Dragons adventures, then also feel free to send me an email to the same email so that I can see your work. Thank you guys so much for the support. Now, I would like to personally thank my patron supporters, Barry Mascan, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Duck Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Alex Cookson, Benjamin Bosters, Folky951, Ordoric, Prince Daylight Morning Crown, Sabim Korshap, Solorensis, Thomas Hunt, Nathan McCum, Soulless Rider, Lost Crusader, Mr. Salty, Stalia, JD Green, Olaf Clapp, Trev909, Nator Rashura, Tony RC, Fatman52, George Fotland, Sovereign Mind, Trevor Hest, Brian Camp, Chad Aga, John the Wicked, Steven, The Living Guild Pack, Michael Walker, Streeblow, Describe, Herbert Johnson, The Wizard's Vault, James the Perverted, Shuddycast, Horror Bound, Jesse Feliciano, Hellion Vantamane, Munchkin Mania, and Baruch for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you guys would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you guys for being here. You guys are awesome. You guys are the best. And I'll see you all next time.